This is Mom Squad Pod, your weekly update on tips, tricks, and all things parenting with Maureen Kyle.
Hi, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us here on the Mom Squad Pod, the podcast where we talk all things parenting. And today's topic is teaching kids how to handle adversity. And I have to admit, I have a tendency to be a helicopter mom in some ways. My kids are still small. I worry about them succeeding. I worry about them getting their feelings hurt. And I know that I need to expose them to adversity in some ways. So to help us out here, we have Dr. David Miller with University Hospitals. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks. So am I off, or am I a typical parent that I want to protect my kids and keep them in bubble wrap and make sure that they don't have their feelings hurt?
Oh, absolutely. I think you are a very typical parent in that way, for sure. I think our instincts are to want our kids to have a blissful, carefree life, that nothing goes wrong, and then that pretty much never happens. Yeah. So.
Are there any certain ways that you think that just groundwork, like adversity, I guess let's define adversity here first, because I want to make sure that it's not being misunderstood as putting our kids in harm's way.
For sure.
And what exactly is facing adversity in a safe way?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, really, that's such a broad category, and so I think we want to think about that in different domains, right? And I think one of them is really, there's the big level adversity, the scary stuff that's going on in society, the school stressors, that have the kids worried about safety at school and things like that. Along those magnitudes. And then there's sort of the more usual level, kid stuff where there's bullying, or there's problems on the playground, or there's sort of those interpersonal challenges that are so profound for many kids. And then there's things like, performance in school, performance in sports. What do you do, when you're not the winning team? What do you do when you get the bad grade on the test? How do you incorporate that into your outlook? So I think when we're thinking about adversity, we definitely want to be thinking in those different domains, because I think there's different preparation for each one, but then there's some commonalities as well.
What do you think is one of the most common that you hear parents talk about the most? Is it the sports, or is it the bullying on the playground, or, what situations?
Yeah, I think, for many kids, I think academic performance is huge. It really depends on the age of the kid as well. As the kids get older, junior high, it really starts going. And then in high school, it's particularly strong, is this feeling of needing to be perfect all the time. And that if you get a B on a test, everything is over. Right. And I think really one of the great pieces of advice that I've picked up over the years is really to, throughout your child's growth and development, throughout their childhood, praise their effort rather than the outcome. Right. That you want to really get them into the habit of trying hard. And even if they fail, the win is that they tried hard. And then that sets them up for being able to win, essentially, even when they fail a little bit. And the reality is that the kid who has that resilience and is able to go at it over and over again will succeed in the long run.
Okay. There's been, over the past years, this is nothing new. We've all heard the parents complain about the everybody gets a trophy situation in sports and in life. And I've heard a lot of parents against that theory of hey, good job, you got the participation trophy. But does that fly in the face of praising the effort? I mean, where do you walk that line?
Right. I think that is a tough line to walk, right? There's this idea of ultimate fairness, and everybody gets kind of the same thing regardless of what happens. And then there's sort of more of a recognition of when someone actually achieves. And I think, I'm more in favor of, praising the kids for their participation, praising them for their effort. But just because every kid participated didn't mean they put forth a good effort. And so, it does muddle that message a little bit, where you're going to get a trophy regardless of what you do, right? So that's sort of the negative flip side of things, is when it can go too far, that actually ends up discouraging kids, because they feel like, why should I even try? I'm going to get the trophy either way, right? So I do think we need to distinguish certain types of rewards for different types of outcomes. And I think it's one way to do that is to help kids figure out where are their strength domains, like where do they really shine, and where can they feel really proud of their abilities, but then also let them participate in activities where they're not as good, and they get that sort of more 360-degree experience of being really the top dog in one place, and in another place they're sort of the follower or the second string or whatever it is, and understanding that diversity of experience will prepare them in other parts of their life as well.
So in general, I mean, in that way, do we want our kids to have that experience of being second string? And then what do they do when they're upset about it?
Well, I think it's that mix is that we want to give the kids the mixed experience where they are first string, we'll call it that, in some areas, and they really get that feeling of being really, excellent, in something, because that's an important experience to have too, is that feeling of achievement and that feeling of being special. But I think it's also important, yes, to put our kids into situations where they see where some of their weaknesses are or where other people are superior to them in certain aspects, but also teach them to appreciate the people who are winning. The person on the team who's the star player, right? Like we can't all be the star player every time, but sometimes it's really nice to be on a team where there's a star player. And so, finding some of the positives of not necessarily being like way out in front, that way, to help them understand the joy of team participation just in general. And again, I think to teach them to appreciate other people's accomplishments in a really healthy way, that makes them a stronger person too. And so I think you can also take that experience of, teaching people to be, a good sport, essentially, whatever the arena is that they're competing in, whether it be academic or social or whatnot. And, to be a gracious loser is a real personal strength. And that if you as the parent also are proud of your child for the way they handled a negative situation, that will often overwrite the disappointment of the situation itself. And so don't underestimate your ability to say, I'm so proud of you for what you did. And, look, Johnny was awesome out there too. You were great, but hey, good work today, that kind of thing.
Right. In a previous podcast, one of our experts brought up when it comes to friendships, and I think friendships and bullying is always a hot topic. Yeah. Getting kids used to that social world that even as adults, I feel like we even still deal with it as adults. Yeah. But having the knowledge and the emotional intelligence, and this goes along with adversity, when a friend says, no, you can't play with me, or a classmate or somebody, or somebody says something mean, like your artwork, I don't want to use bad words, I don't like your artwork. I don't like your, you're bad at soccer. And it hurts their feelings. Yeah. How do you talk them through that? How do you make that a teachable moment for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, part of that comes that if we have the opportunity to, we prepare ahead of time for that. And we can run through like sort of scenarios. And I think this works really well with really younger kids, sort of, basically like 3 to 8 year olds, for example. That's a great age range to do this, where you can sort of think up imaginary situations and say, okay, so say you're playing football and someone says, oh, you looked stupid when you were playing football, and, what are you going to do? And the kids can kind of think about it in a situation where it hasn't actually happened and sort of work through, what's the sequence of what am I going to want to do when, should this actually happen to me? So, so preparing them in that way is important. Sometimes, the answer is you just want to, give a hug to somebody and say that was really wrong. And, you're right. That was a nasty thing to say. And, and teach them like, we don't want to be that person either. Like we want to, learn how that feels and like help them understand sort of, how to turn their emotions into really empathy for other people. So, taking sort of, lemons and making lemonade out of it really in that way, but helping them develop their emotional insight. How do I put words to my emotions? How do I manage this? Why am I allowing that person, that kid, to define me like that? It's a good conversation about like, we have to look into ourselves and self-define a little bit too. And as the parent, you can say, I really appreciate this. To me, your artwork was beautiful. And, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So why are you giving that person so much sway over your emotions? And enter into those conversations, and I think sometimes it's always going to hurt a little bit, but the idea is to sort of help them gain insight, help them become a richer person, and bounce back. Yeah.
What kind of character traits are we talking about here when kids learn to deal with adversity? What kind of I know you mentioned resilience, but like what kind of character building does this do when they learn how to hear no or lose a game and be able to walk away and be okay with it?
Well, I think it makes them just a more robust and well-rounded person overall, and I think it prepares them better to be a member of a complex society. Really our experiences in childhood form the basis upon which we're going to build our interactions as adults. And so if we learn how to manage sort of adversity on the playground, then we already have a framework for managing adversity in the workplace, right? Because they're not really all that different, unfortunately. I mean, sometimes, yes. But really this is forming that foundation of their own sort of emotional and personality sort of stability and their ability to adapt to complex situations. And so you're teaching, right, resilience or adaptability, self-esteem, compassion, empathy. I think another thing that we can do to really help our kids is, to sort of flip the anger and flip the pain and the fear and say, well, that person was really mean to you and they said nasty things, but let's think about like, why maybe did they come at you from that perspective? Like what could be going on in their life that's causing them to be so angry and to feel like they're powerless and so they need to take power over somebody else. So teaching them about those interpersonal dynamics and building compassion for the people who are being mean to us, not to excuse their behavior, but to explain their behavior, right? To understand that people don't do things really without some sort of a background leading to that action. And I think it's important for our kids to develop that more than just surface level judgment of other people, because we're going to always see people throughout our lives who do bad things, but that doesn't necessarily make them at core somehow really bad, unredeemable people, right? They may be dealing with some adversity of their own that they don't know how to manage.
What's that follow-up? I mean, I'm trying to think of the follow-up question that a kid might have when you say, well, that person's struggling with something, that's making them feel bad about themselves. They're taking it out on you. And then you get the why. I mean, how does that go? I feel like I'd have to tread lightly and not make assumptions about the other family or make assumptions about the kid, then I'd be afraid to teach my child to then categorize somebody as, I don't know. They might have problems at home, or they might have. How do you continue that conversation, go a little deeper, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you don't necessarily know the exact information, then you can speak to them in generalities, in the sense of like, we don't know exactly what's going on, with this kid at school, but we know in general that people do that when they're feeling sad or when they're feeling scared or when, things are hard at home or, when they're feeling bad about themselves. So we can sort of use it as an example of maybe there's 10 reasons why this could be happening. Like we don't know exactly what's going on with that person, but we do know from looking at human behavior and from our own life experiences that there are, say, these 10 reasons why people tend to act in those ways, and we can sort of think through those different reasons. And I think just having that conversation, and it's sort of a matter of opening up possibilities for the child, that kids and adults too tend to respond to a situation as if they in some way sort of absolutely understand what's going on, and that they have this one experience and it's this one thing. And so to kind of open that up a little bit and create possibilities from it as to how we're going to interpret what happened gives them some latitude sort of emotionally to move forward.
You mentioned ages 3 to 8 earlier, and mine are still under that age of 8. After that, do you notice that kids and teens start to internalize and not talk to parents as much about, when they do face a situation where they're feeling bad about their school performance, their on the field performance, or a relationship at school? Do they keep it bottled up and then we have to bring it out of them?
It may be the case. I mean, certainly many kids will do that, but I think it's also, how do we lay the groundwork to decrease the chances that they're going to take that path? And I think when you start with the younger kids and you start teaching them habits like, when they come home from school, let's do a check-in. How was your day? Who did you meet today? What were your conversations? What was really one good thing that happened today? What was one thing that felt challenging today? And you start at that early age before they become sort of self-conscious and and feel sort of weird about doing it with you, and it becomes their normal. And then when they get to be older, it's still their normal, and they may pull back a little bit, but you will have established a foundation, that you can stand on. And I think that's a really important thing to be teaching in that young skill set. We want to think of kids who are in that younger age group as being more, they're more family oriented, more parent oriented, more sibling oriented. And when you start getting after about age 8 or so, sort of with a fuzzy border, the kids start becoming more peer oriented, and it's those peer relationships that become the primary source of support a lot of the time too. So it's also knowing who our kids' friends are, and knowing who the friends who are really good sounding boards for our kids are, and say, maybe you should talk to Sally about that issue because, you guys are really close, things like that.
I want to get back to being a helicopter parent because I think this applies to all ages. I feel like in my head, and then I've heard friends also say this, that we look back on our pasts and say, well, I really struggled when it came to math, or I really struggled when it came to making close friends, and I don't want that for my child. But do we want them to not struggle, but have a challenge? And when it comes to a social situation, I think about it the other day, my daughter walked into a friends group and she stayed on the sideline kind of watching what the girls were doing. And I said, where are you going? Just go talk to your friends, and she told me later, I was nervous, but, and me in that moment, I wanted her to go, not be the shy person I was when I was that age. So do we do that? Do we, take our own struggles, project them on our child, and then try to protect them in that way?
Well, I think we take our own struggles, project them on the children, and then for any number of reasons. Yeah. And so there can be an instinct to protect the child from the suffering that we had, and that's not a bad instinct at all. But I do think we have to be careful about that, because also our kids are oftentimes really different people than we were, right? And they can have completely different personality styles. They can have completely different just life experiences. And so their reasons for taking certain actions may not actually be the same as our reasons. So, exploring with the child what they're doing and understanding their interpretation of what's going on. Because there are kids who their sort of personality style is to sort of sit on the sidelines for a little while, kind of watch everything that's going on, and then step in, right? Other kids are like busting in like gangbusters right at the beginning and just jumping into the fold. And so, neither of those is right or wrong. And so, we also want to understand what's just a personality style that we want to, nurture and adapt to versus something that actually indicates sort of pathology in a way, something that's actually really wrong.
And we kind of talked about it at the beginning, and I've also heard on other parenting podcasts, let the child play to their strengths. Like if my child's great at soccer, then yes, I'm going to put them in soccer, and maybe I don't push them in baseball. But then I've also heard we shouldn't ignore their weaknesses, or even on the opposite side too, where in school, we will focus on, they're getting a B in math, we need to send them to a tutor. I think I keep saying math because I struggled in math, but I mean, like, or if it's reading, we need to get them a tutor, and then we focus so much on the area where they're struggling that we're not focusing on the areas where they are excelling. Where do we focus our energy to make sure that they are working on their, I don't want to say weaknesses, but I mean, for all intents and purposes, their weaknesses or where they struggle, to help them overcome that. And then also build up where they are shining so they have that confidence.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it goes along to what we were saying. Basically, we want our kids to understand that they're, they have a multifactorial kind of nature, right? Like we're not all good at everything and we're not all terrible at everything. And I think helping them understand that as creatures, humans are like that, right? Like we all have our strengths, we all have our weaknesses. And it is important to challenge ourselves and keep sort of pushing our own boundaries, and that sometimes the places where we excel naturally can be really fun, but they're also not making us grow as people, you know? And so I think framing adversity as an opportunity for self-development and self-growth and becoming stronger and better overall, you know, gives the kids permission to fail, and then going back to that praising the effort, you know, kind of thing. Because right, if a kid comes home, they're awesome at math, for example, and they get an A, and you're like, awesome, you got an A, and the kid's thinking, well, I didn't really try that hard, you know.
Yeah.
The praise doesn't really mean that much, but you know, a kid who's been getting D's in math who comes home with a B minus, that's worthy of like a night out for dinner, a special dinner, you know. They've really made an effort and they've come forward. And so, you know, giving them permission to fail as long as, you know, they're making a good effort, you know. And sometimes it's helpful for them to, for all of us, but for kids particularly, to use sort of physical analogies or physical metaphors, you know, and things like, you know, weightlifting, for example, is one that can be good. You know, we can all lift like a half-pound weight. Like that's not super impressive, you know, but we find that place where we're working to lift the weight, right? And then we do that for a while, and we get stronger, and then we can lift more weight, right? But if we go to something that's too hard to fast, we may end up just hurting ourselves. You know, so real concrete kinds of ways of understanding, because that can be true of math too. You know, you can do super simple math problems and it doesn't really advance you, or someone could throw you like a sheet of calculus that's like, oh my God, what's that? You know, but in between there's sort of like could be fun challenges and gradually growing, and to teach them to enjoy that process of growth and development. Like you don't have to play symphony piano the first time you sit down at the keys.
Yeah. Is there something that we can be doing at home as families or as parents to exercise that practice of facing adversity and resilience?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can model the behavior yourself. That's always a really, really valuable thing for kids. They're watching you as the parent very closely, and they're patterning off you. So looking in your own life at challenges that you're having and talking those through with the kids and how you're dealing with it, and maybe how you didn't do so well or how you did really great. But either way, sharing your strategies and your experience as you go is one of the most powerful things that you can do to teach the kids to manage that. And then, you know, after that, it's starting to look at their experience and then pulling those pieces, those moments out where they're having those, and using those as teachable moments, and saying, oh, remember when I said I was having that really hard time at work with that person, and this is how we resolved it? Well, it sounds like you're having a similar situation. How do you think you might resolve it? But talking about things, having them on the table. And, you know, I think in some ways, you know, you can do the practice ones too, where you create sort of, you know, fictional situations that you want the child to think through, but in reality too, there's probably plenty of opportunities in day-to-day to identify areas where there's a teachable moment. And so looking for those and you know, bringing them out, I think is a really, really good practice.
What about playing games as a family? I mean, I feel like you mentioned early years, how this starts to form. And I just think of, I've seen people handle it differently over the years, of not letting their kids win, or changing the rules to let them win so that they don't feel bad. I mean, do we, you know, not let our kid win at Monopoly so that they learn that, you know, that losing is part of life?
Right. Well, I think that's very age dependent too, you know, and where are you in the process of learning the game? And so, you know, I think that I love the idea of game playing as a family. I think it's a great bonding experience, and my family, we're big game players, like our extended family. And so there's a lot of card playing, a lot of game playing. And so we all get used to winning and losing all the time. And so that is just a wonderful family experience. And then being able to model how you behave when you lose, maybe by saying, wow, great job. You really beat me this time. Well done. You know, sort of praising that, and being a gracious loser gives you that same opportunity to present that to the child and model the behavior. I think with really little kids, like if you're playing like a card game or a board game, or, you know, Chutes and Ladders or whatever, with like a 2, 3, 4, 5-year-old, then sometimes you might kind of let them have a little bit of an advantage. You know, like they don't have to know it. Sometimes you can tell them like, well, let me give you 2, you know, sort of that, you know, a little bit of a handicap in golf kind of idea.
Right.
And that's fine to do. I think that ultimately, though, it is important to give them that experience of winning and losing, and to pick interactions where they actually have a chance of winning. I still remember when my nephew, who liked to play chess with me when he was like 6, and I'm not a chess player, but I could beat him at 6, and then by the time he was in junior high and did the chess club, he could beat me every time. And so I think that was entertaining for both of us to kind of see that, that growth and development. And so think of it also as not just a snapshot moment in time, but how will this moment play later on? And so maybe they start losing more frequently earlier on, and then they start winning more, and you can highlight that development over time. That's really meaningful to them, and they can look back and see, oh, I get it. I stuck with it, I pushed through, and now I can beat mom at whatever, the game
Right.
we're playing.
Right. Earlier, you mentioned kids, teens really wanting that perfectionism. And I feel like we really live in a society now where, especially a few years ago, there was this need to show perfectionism on, you look at Instagram and you want that life, and people were afraid to show their flaws and their failures. Now we're seeing the pendulum swing back.
Yeah.
But is there any way to, should we be emphasizing showing imperfections? And how do we do that as parents?
Right. I think it's an interesting question. And I'm a big fan of more authenticity, helping them understand the difference between sort of, Hollywood magic and what the reality of the world is. The other thing that I think is helpful for kids too, and I'll just keep saying, the more we can do this over the lifespan, the more powerful it will be, is to give them different images of things like what was beauty like in the 1700s? What was beauty like in this other culture? What was beauty like, in these different eras? Because the conceptualization, for example, of beauty changes over time, and so there were times and eras where being more sort of robust physically was actually considered the much more preferable, beauty style, not super, super too thin kind of thin that sometimes we see today, or disproportionate in some way. So helping them to understand the arbitrariness of this sort of absolutist thinking gives them, again, latitude to put it into context, so that they have more choices.
So to wrap it up, I mean, we shouldn't wrap our kids in bubble wrap and protect them from everything. We would be doing them a disservice.
Correct. Absolutely. Right. You got to let your kids sort of slip and fall and get up. And it's how you manage them when they slip and fall and get up. I think the image I would give is, I've seen kids on the playground, right? They slip and fall and they scrape their knee and they stop for a second and they kind of look around like, I'm not quite sure how I should react to this. And the parent runs up and the parent can either go, oh my God, honey, how are you turning? The kid bursts into tears and all of a sudden they're panicked. Or you can say, wow, good fall, get up and keep going. And the kid's like, oh, awesome. And they get up and keep going, right? Yeah. So how we help our child interpret their experience really can affect how resilient they are. And sometimes this desire to overprotect actually makes them weaker. And so we have to just balance that with when do they really need us to be there and give them a hug and be more of a consistent source of support, it's navigating that.
Right. This has been great advice. Dr. David Miller, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for all of your advice. Well, if I get follow-up questions from parents, I know who to call, because I feel like this is one of those topics that we're always wondering, am I doing this right?
It's a huge one, right? Thank you, Maureen, for having me. I mean, it's a wonderful topic, and it's been a delight to be here.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for listening, everyone. We'll see you on the next Mom Squad podcast.
Thanks for listening to Mom Squad Pod with Maureen Kyle from WKYC Studios. Subscribe now so you never miss an update. And find more on everything you heard here on WKYC.com and on the WKYC app.